strategic risk mapping. So strategic risk mapping being one of the 5 principles for equitable and responsible research that Valuing Voices promotes. My name's Karen Glarum, and I'm here with my colleague Lucy Cheseldine, and we are both the Training and Resources Development Officers for the Valuing Voices project. And we're joined today also by Carissa George, Ross Cumming, and Emma Williams, who will share insights and experiences about risks and how to mitigate risks. So very welcome to you as well. Just for a very quick overview, we have, as I said, 5 principles for equitable and responsible research. So that's engagement and impact, equity and diversity in teams, strategic risk mapping, which we will dive into today, environmental sustainability, and reflection and learning. So we're on the 3rd session today, halfway through. And so environmental sustainability and reflection and learning deep dives are still to come in the next months. And what we're saying as Valuing Voices is that if you keep those 5 principles in mind, you're well on your way to doing research well in terms of being equitable and responsible and therefore hopefully more impactful in your research. So today, just for a brief overview, we're going to look at what is strategic risk mapping. How do you make a start with strategic risk mapping? We will have examples of risks and support with how you can mitigate risks, and we're looking at the Valuing Voices tool and approach to embed strategic risk mapping. So first of all, what's our definition? So within the Valuing Voices context, we have identified strategic risk mapping as identifying potential risks to your project, prioritizing what you can address, because of course you don't have control over all the risks that are out there, but you may find ways to address them. Plan for mitigation, and what's also very important, monitoring throughout a project. A lot of the times we write a research proposal, we think about the risks then, but we don't really follow up with that throughout the project until a risk, just appears, and we have to deal with it right there, right then, in maybe a bit more haphazard way as you would like to. So within this context, we have defined the types of risks. So they're mostly high-level strategic risks, such as geopolitical risks. What if there's a change in power, as we can all think of examples from in certain countries, which also comes with a change in how research can be conducted. It's about reputational risks, which are more and more prevalent, especially with the rise of social media, and the risk of being cancelled if you may, perhaps publish research and research findings not everybody agrees with. And then there's the compliance risks. So especially in international contexts, this can be very complex. Are you complying with the privacy rules, for example? Are you complying with the Equality Act, health and safety regulations, and so on and so forth? So those are very big, high-level risks. But then what I really like about this particular principle is that health and well-being is also included as a risk. So that's a health and well-being of maybe research participants, which is usually something we are very aware of, but also the risks to ourselves as researchers, which is possibly something not everybody talks about or thinks about on a daily basis. But at the same time, it's completely logical, because if somebody is not well in their job, and either quits or becomes ill, that's a huge risk to any research project. So it is well worth thinking about these risks as well. So just to demystify it all a bit, strategic risk mapping is basically it's about being extremely pessimistic for a minute, not all the time, but for this particular exercise. Think of all the things that could go wrong in your project. And brainstorm about that. We through our workshops, we know that if people come together from different disciplines and look at the risks of a project, we've done those exercises, different risks come up. So make sure you have a diversity in your team or in the group you're brainstorming with, so you can identify all the risks more accurately. And we also say, especially to younger researchers who may not necessarily be working in a team or on a really big project, reframe your worries as risks. So we've talked to a lot of early career researchers, and they're worried about not having access to data, not being done in time with their research, and those are risks there. So we have been teaching them to take those risks from the personal worry to the professional, and that is a way to make it easier to talk about risks like that. What can we control? So we will have limited power, and the next one, prioritising, is having limited resources. So what can we control and mitigate is about where do we have influence, and how can we prioritise is how do we allocate our limited resources, either time, money, but as efficiently as possible to minimize those risks. And the last one is how can we keep track of the risk throughout a whole research project. So why is this also important? To be honest, initially I found this probably the most boring principle out of the 5, but talking to researchers and really digging into this particular principle, I now feel like it's my number 1 principle, because if you know the risks and for example, who you need in your team, you will know who you need to engage with to have maximum impact. You know what to reflect on. So I feel like it's a really essential tool to strengthen your research, to make sure that all time and effort you allocate to your work actually leads to impactful results. So it's making the most of your work, your limited resources, to get the result that you want. So how do we get started? I already touched upon that. So it's about being candid, even as a team. What are you worried about? I'll show you in a minute what our risk map looks like in Value Voices. But it is quite frank. It's even at the moment, because we're coming to the end of our project funding. It's the worries about losing jobs, for example, that has a particular impact on our team. So it's on the risk map. We can brainstorm together. To identify the risks, but also to help you think about how to mitigate those risks. We've seen some brilliant examples already from when we did workshops with, again with early career researchers, how they were helping each other coming up with with ways to mitigate risks. So it's about involving those outside experts for fresh perspectives, and you may do that, yeah, through talking to colleagues. It can also be done by involvement and engagement, and you can, yeah, you can look up what people are saying online. There's many ways to get those fresh perspectives, but they will enrich your analysis. And then the last one is commit in your project to the continuous monitoring. So not just a one-off exercise to get you through the ethics committee, but keep doing that, yeah, continuously. So as I said, I'll give you an example of what our risk register looks like in Valuing Voices. So we call ourselves a living lab in which we practice what we preach. So we've come on with this particular risk register, which works for us, but is just an example of how you can approach this. So, sorry, we name the risk. That's column 1 or column A. We describe the risk. We categorize it. So yeah, as you can see, we have mental risk, physical risk, but we also have risks to the timeline, for example, risks to meeting our goals. There's a number of risks that we have in these categories. We identify the likelihood of a risk to actually happen. We analyze the risk, and then we think of a way to mitigate the risk. And based on that, we give it a priority. So that's about how much of your limited time and money would you be willing to spend on this risk? How important is it to mitigate this risk? How much can we afford to run the risk? And I think that's really important. We give it ownership. So it's not just something, oh yeah, we have this overview and every month we look at it and for the rest of the time it's out of sight. We actually give somebody ownership of risk, and they will monitor the risk and take action if necessary. And it's not like they have to take that action all by themselves or come up with the with the solutions all by themselves, but it's just making sure it's on somebody's monitor, basically. So that's in short, yeah, what strategic risk mapping looks like within the Valuing Voices context, how you can approach it. And I'd like to give the floor now to Carisha, who's going to tell us something about her work, very important work on the risks minoritized researchers run in EDI work. So over to you, Carisha.
Oh, perfect. So you're going to move it for me? Okay, perfect. So, okay, perfect. Okay. Going to be one more thing, so that is something to keep in mind. Essentially, what I'm going to review for you is a brief overview of our project that we ran, luckily and lovingly, funded by Valuing Voices. We were specifically interested in exploring the experiences of minoritized staff working in EDI. And the two QR codes you see on the slide are two of our outputs from the project. So in the first one, is the QR code policy brief. So we had two different sets of participants that we interviewed for the project. One was just researchers working within EDI, and the second one was all staff working within EDI. So we know, for instance, within the University of York, we have student well-being officers and EDI champions who do actual socially related work within like interaction related work in EDI, and they don't necessarily count as researchers within EDI. So the first one is a policy brief, and that one is targeting the senior leaders, funding bodies, and PIs about kind of what protections can be put in place for minoritized staff working in EDI. And the second one is cover kind of general staff working in EDI. And the recommendations across the two of them are kind of similar in some ways. So both of them recommend culturally competent well-being support, but they are also different recommendations. So minoritized identities, when they work with certain PIs who are majority identity, they feel like they're only being used as currency, and the rest of their skills are being ignored. And so that is something that we have a recommendation for in the policy brief. And within the general staff, it was about kind of grassroots EDI work being kind of ignored. And we recommended, for instance, there that they have an EDI spotlight kind of series where they spotlight different people, but also provide the winner of the spotlight with the opportunity to develop their EDI kind of skills in some way. So linking it as well into kind of promotion criteria, those types of things. So I do welcome you outside of this session to have a look at the project output itself. Okay, so I'm just going to set the context really quickly before introducing you to the project and then kind of outlining a bit more about those outcomes. So we know that within the UK higher education, we are not seeing as much progress in EDI, especially compared to how long we've known EDI is a key milestone that we have to achieve. We've not seen as much progress as we would have liked to see. And one of the main things that have come out from the literature that is suggesting why this is the case is that within EDI, we have a very high staff turnover. And it's a field then that has to start over because the staff leave with their expertise, and then new staff coming in, they have to develop that expertise themselves. So again, we don't have that knowledge sharing either. And that is about that revolving door of EDI. And it's just a phrase that was known in the literature. And that high staff turnover is what our project was trying to understand. And we was particularly trying to understand what was happening with minoritized staff, because within every single institution, at least one person within an EDI team is from a minoritized background. And we're not just talking about visible minoritized backgrounds, we're also talking about invisible minoritized backgrounds as well. So we did have within our samples staff who were disabled, staff who were from low SES, because we also counted that as being from a minoritized background. And they are there because we understand that they bring their lived experience. So there are two types of experiences that we benefit from within EDI. There's that lived experience and that learned experience. And minoritized staff bring that lived experience to the table. And it's something what the literature calls cultural capital. This derived from cultural capital as developed by Bordeaux, where he was saying that being someone from high class gives you certain invisible culture that brings you benefits. So the way you speak, the way you carry about yourself, the way you dress, lets other people know that you are from a higher class and they treat you differently. And it's been taken over by minoritized researchers to refer to the fact that we also bring cultural capital to the table. You benefit from our insights of our lived experience. We're more effective in advocacy because when somebody sees someone from a minoritized background working in EDI, they're more likely to get interested and involved in whatever we are offering. Right? So these similar mechanisms, for instance, as we see in peer research, when you want to research a specific population. And given that we have this resource, what we were trying to figure out is, are we appreciating the full impact of the personal relevance of this work? If they're bringing this lived experience, then they're going to be personally involved in it because it represents that they're trying to fight against maybe, and in most cases, the discrimination that they themselves have experienced. They're trying to make and change the processes and the systems that perpetuate this experience throughout the generations. So are we fully understanding the impact of that personal relevance and thinking about things like professional burnout? So just to give you a kind of gist, we had around 42 individuals. We interviewed 42 individuals. When I then emailed them again to invite them to the forum, I got about 4 bounce backs. So out of the 40 individuals, 4 people have already left their roles. Right, so then we were talking there about that professional burnout, and EDI is ever expanding. So once you're in an EDI role, everybody then gives you more EDI stuff to do. And then there are also those well-being implications, particularly with the absence of the culturally competent well-being support that we mentioned earlier. So just an overview of the project, and I'm very keen on creating Google Sites because I feel like I'm not very creative, but if you put enough pictures on there, it looks creative. So I have many project websites. I have like 10. I always create the website for the project. So this is the project website. And so everything that you need to know about the project generally is on there. I don't want to bore you with everything, but basically we had 2 main researchers on this. I got really into it, so I kind of overdid it on the interviews. So I did 43 interviews. The other person person did 19. And so we had 62 interviews. There were EDI researchers. I even interviewed one of the researchers that was very prevalent in the COVID-19 work. I was just like, oh, star. And then we had research enablers, because PS staff are among my favorite people. And then we had wider HE staff as well. There were a range of universities, so I did become one of those junk emails people get in the inbox. And now I read those junk emails because I have a lot of pity for them. But we got people to respond. So we had people from Open University, University of Chester, University of St. Andrews, and a range of other universities as well. There were two funders, of course, Value and Voices, but we also got some money from VTI Policy Group. So what I'm going to go through with you now are the three main themes that emerged, right? So the first one is exhaustion. The second one is disillusionment, and the third one is disempowerment. I'm going to go through very briefly the 5 sub-themes within them, but what I want us to take away from this is just a general understanding of some of the real life things that people are experiencing. And I provided a quote here from Lucy's suggestion to help you guys to kind of visualize that a bit more as well. So from the emotional hidden labor, what we're talking about here is that participants were seeing the personal relevance of working in EDI to them meant that they felt that they consistently had to be representing for those who did not have a voice when they had a voice in the space. And that meant constantly retelling their story. And if you're constantly retelling your story of discrimination over time, that has an emotional toll. So that emotional hidden labor. And then because you have this very important role of voicing for everybody within your background, you feel that you always have to be on the spot, right? So you always have this intense perfectionist pressure to always perform at your best at all times, because every weight of that is on your shoulder. And then we had the clothing and code switching coercion. And that was because a lot of people that we interviewed came from intersectional identities. And for those who don't know what that is, that's when you have multiple minoritized identities. So people usually put me in the black box, but I also have a disability, and I also come from a low SES background. So having to then represent in certain spaces is that people put you in specific boxes, and you're here for this part of EDI. So you're not meant to mention or talk about another part of EDI. And so they felt when they were in certain spaces, they were only able to speak about the EDI that they were associated with professionally and not bring that full lived experience to the table. But also we're talking about unfair workload distributions, because there's this lack of understanding of what EDI actually involves. Once someone has an EDI role, everything related to EDI is then put on that person. And we also found that this was most likely the case when it was grassroots work. People who work in, and when we say grassroots, you mean when you're working one-to-one with other people. So for instance, we're talking about our student well-being officers, etc., etc. And that then meant that that was kind of put to the side. And especially when we had PS staff, for instance, when we had like people working voluntarily on our staff research, race equality forums, or the Rainbow Alliance. If they were PS staff, that wasn't recognized officially as part of their workload. So it was work that they had to do in their own spare time. And the quote that we have here is telling us about the need to kind of cloak and mask. And this is one of my favorite quotes. It actually has led to my new favorite quote, where I'm just like, I have the confidence of a mediocre white man. Essentially, what this individual is telling us is that they know that when they go into spaces to be heard, the people who are the majority in that space who don't have that lived experience has to be able to hear them and understand what they're saying. And so they have to talk as they will talk. And so they were saying that because the majority of people in those spaces are white men, they have to bring their mediocre white man to the table in order to be heard and listened to. And we can, you'll get these slides after, I'm sure, so you'll be able to read it in detail. But the final sentence tells us everything. So yeah, I do that. I have this inner white mediocre man that comes out now and again. So the second one is about disillusionment. And again, really quickly, I'll go through it. So traumatization was about that personal relevance mixed with the slow pace of change. As we already mentioned, EDI has this very slow pace. So the fact that they have to tell their stories and then promise these things to people, and then they don't happen, or they happen at a snail's pace, then re-traumatizes them to their experiences that they've had previously. Diversity maskers, and this was particularly about the researchers, where they were feeling that if they were hired for projects on EDI because they had that lived experience, then all they became was that lived experience, or the rest of their kind of expertise or the rest of their skills became secondary to being put in the spotlight when they needed to have a face for the project. And then permanent advocacy. So that is about the fact that not only are they consistently telling their stories, but EDI is ever expanding. You then have people approaching you to talk to you, and seek support about stories that they think you will understand. And so that having to consistently being able to be there for other people, even though it's not part of your role, but hear those stories, share your stories, that sense of permanent advocacy and never being able to switch off. That was something that came out as well. And then finally, lack of culturally competent well-being support meant that they had to deal with all of these burdens on their own without having someone to actually speak to about it. Now, this quote is again one of the most powerful quotes that they had. This came from one of our white female disabled participants. And she was talking about the fact that when she's trying to talk to people about the importance of EDI and to talk to them about why everybody should be involved, why it shouldn't be just her, talking about this advocating and for working on kind of making things better for people. She's saying it's not just me saying, oh, this is an important part of our jobs, it's me trying to validate my existence. So it's me screaming like a kid, like, I don't feel safe here. Please make it safe for me. And this is the way everybody else that I'm seeing, that I'm representing, feels like. And so it's that personalization that's present within this quote as well. And then our final quote is about disempowerment. And here for the toxic competition, what came out for us a lot was that within EDI, there's this hierarchy where certain kind of backgrounds are seen as always able to kind of champion those backgrounds, and it's okay to champion those backgrounds. But with others, you had to be careful how you champion them. And if, for instance, you particularly championed race, you were seen as discriminating against all others because all others are not limiting to in relation to white individuals can be involved in those others, but white individuals feel like if they can't be involved in race. So race in particular was seen as the lower end of that EDI hierarchy. Limited career progression, again, that's kind of linked to the toxic competition. So people who generally were very kind of advocating within EDI, they felt that they were limiting their career prospects because they were now being seen as problematic because they're always bringing problems to the table to be fixed. Isolation, and that's because EDI to some degree becomes a thing where everybody thinks, oh, I can do EDI, so I can get this badge on my career, on my CV. And so when people who are passionate about EDI, who have that personal relevance and that lived experience work in EDI, what they're finding is that they're surrounded by people who are not really taking it seriously and are not there because they're passionate and they feel a sense of isolation. And that then over time led to the resentment because these people who are performative are the ones who tend to get the correct progression opportunities. And this our final quote talks a bit about that. It talks about having to feel like if you have to advocate because it's this personal relevance, it's important, but also if you advocate, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Right? So some people don't see it that way. It's a passion for me. There's a passion there because I can see a problem, but she's always the one who's bringing a mess to the table. So what we're trying to do next, because I know that the project highlighted a lot of problems, so we are making efforts to try to make some change to it. What we're proposing is that for PIs, they have to engage meaningfully with the lived experience of minoritized research staff. So appreciate their full skills profile and consider and embed intersectionality so there's not this cloaking and code switching pressure. There's also for institutions and for funding bodies to have that requirement that EDI project results are embedded into institutional processes, so we don't see this lack of progress and this loss of knowledge every single time we have staff turnover. And that will then lead to EDI informed institutional culture, and also it will help them to see the need for the culturally competent well-being support. For general EDI staff, we are starting an EDI staff forum to connect people across different universities and ensure meaningful collaboration and discussion. But we also have trying to get started those EDI monthly spotlights where they not just get their page and get their face being recognized for a month, but there's actual improvement to their career prospects by giving them an upskilling opportunity. And this will involve both EDI researchers, but also those doing grassroots work. So our specific plans and how you can get involved, we are launching our EDI staff forum on the 15th of May, 10 a.m. to 2:30 at the University of York. And so essentially, we want to bring EDI staff together, and we are having a second event for these stakeholders, and those will be these senior leaders, PIs, and funding bodies on Wednesday, the 17th of June. We have just confirmed to the Archibong, who I really want to meet in person and have her like I met her in person, but always around other people. So this one is online. This is not going to be in person, but it's a long journey to watch me and her because I really want her to be my mentor. So essentially, I'm roping her in slowly. In 2 years, check me. She'll be my mentor in 2 years. But she's been confirmed as our senior leader speaker, and we are trying to get somebody from Welcome Trust to be our funding body speaker, and then we'll be presenting the recommendations to them in that. So we have the EDI protection staff forum in May, and then we're having that stakeholders event in June. And then the final one.
And I think that might be it for your slides, Carisha.
Oh, okay. I deleted a slide, but it's okay. Okay, next. It's okay. Let's go to the next speaker. Thank you so much. Oh, do we have question time?
Yeah, if anyone's got a burning question, please do pop it in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. We'll have time for questions at the end as well. So if think of anything, but if Carisha has to leave, for any reason, you might want to ask your question now.
Okay, I can hang on. Don't worry.
Fantastic. We'll be sharing the slides and we'll share your contact details after. And thank you very much, Carisha. It's a fantastic insight into what has been a brilliant project, and it's been a pleasure to be part of it and to see it grow. So thank you so much for sharing your findings.
Okay.
Great stuff. So we'll move on to our next speakers. I'll move on to the next slide. So we have Ros Cumming and Emma Williams from the Vulnerability and Policing Futures Research Centre, who very kindly come along to talk about some of the mitigations and plans for risk involved in their work. So over to you, and just let me know when you want to change the slides.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lucy. And thank you very much to Carisha as well. That was really inspiring and interesting project that you've been talking about, and speaks to a lot of the work that we've been doing as well. So I'm just going to briefly kind of give a little bit of context about our centre. I'm the centre manager. We are, as Lucy said, the Vulnerability and Policing Futures Research Centre. We were established in 2022 with £10 million of ESRC funding, which sounds like a lot, certainly in the context of social sciences, but stretched over the number of institutions that are involved, it doesn't go as far as you might think. We were established to look at reshaping how the police and other organisations work together to reduce harm among vulnerable people in society. So that's what the Research Centre is about. And if you want to skip probably 2 slides forward, Lucy, that's it. This just gives a little bit of overview. So as I say, we've been going since 2022, so we're about to enter the 5th and final year of our current funding. We're jointly led by the University of York and the University of Leeds. And we have a team of 18 staff across those 2 institutions, including research staff, postdocs, some PhD students, as well as 4 now professional support staff as well. But in addition to that, we have more than 20 co-investigators across 11 other institutions and more than 38 formal external partner organisations. So you can envisage that just gives you a bit of a sense of the scale. It was a little bit like establishing a small organisation within the organisation when we were first setting up. And if you can skip forward to the next slide. EDI was very much kind of baked into the funding proposal for our centre, as I think it often is with these ESRC funded centres of excellence. And we did take that very seriously, sort of from before the centre was established. And right at the beginning, we set up and agreed this set of values and principles, which are all kind of expanded upon on our website. And I just kind of wanted to draw your attention to this by way of context, because I think particularly around the inclusive and anti-discriminatory point there's a lot of stuff that we've done, which partly came out of mapping of risks, but partly came out of setting these principles as kind of guiding forces, if you like, for the work that we were going to be doing. That has led to implementation of work within our centre that I think reflects quite nicely the broader kind of valuing voices themes that you guys have been looking at as well. So we haven't got time to go into them all today, but just as a couple of examples, we've tried to hold ourselves to account when it comes to both ethics and equality, diversity and inclusion. We've set up an ethical oversight panel that was looking at sort of high level ethical issues related to the challenging work that we were doing, and getting them to act as critical friends to kind of help us navigate through some of those issues. We've introduced an EDI self-audit process, which has helped us to kind of identify areas where we wanted to go further, we wanted to do more. And then importantly, in the context, I think what Carisha was talking about, trying to ensure that responsibility was shared and kind of we were collaborating on some of those things across the team. So setting up task and finish groups, for example, on anti-racist practice, and community reciprocity being two examples there. We've developed a strategy on lived experience co-production and a policy on how we remunerate people across our two lead institutions, which kind of complicates things a little bit, but remunerating people who support our work, particularly people with lived experience or the organisations that advocate for them. And we've taken positive action in recruitment in relation to certain particular posts across Leeds and York as well. So lots of work that we've been doing there that I think broadly kind of speaks to a lot of the work that you guys are focusing on. And we are seeking to produce some outputs now that we're entering the final year of our grant as well, that will allow others to understand what how we've tried to approach these things. Not that we're saying that we've got everything right, but certainly we've made some real efforts to address some of these issues. So hopefully others can kind of learn from that as well. But if you skip forward to the next slide, obviously when we were establishing, that's the link. When we were establishing the centre at the outset, we had to take a risk mapping approach. So we had to set up a risk register as part of our funding. So we did that in quite a structured way, and we had something that looks very similar to the example, Karen, that you shared at the beginning. And people's well-being came up right from the outset, in part because of the context we'd set for ourselves and the values and principles that we were keen to establish, that we were already thinking, very much focused on participant well-being, but also importantly researcher well-being, because of the type of research that we knew we were going to be doing with vulnerable people that have been experienced abuse and trauma in various different contexts, and in their interactions with the criminal justice system as well. So lots of kind of sensitive areas, and areas that can be kind of re-traumatizing both for those people and for the researchers involved. So it came from our risk register, and as you say, it's very easy for a risk register to be kind of produced and then kind of put on a shelf, which obviously we didn't want to do, and that does get revisited periodically. But I think that what we did with it off the back of that is the bit that's probably more interesting, because it's seen as a kind of ongoing collaborative effort, not just to kind of tick it off the list that we've thought about that and now we can put it to one side. So it came back from our ethical oversight panel. They were really keen to kind of push us on it and ask us what more we wanted to, we were able to do to address it. We also put in place an ECR, early career researcher champion, within the centre, and she kind of acted as a bit of an advocate to make sure that the researchers' voices themselves were being heard. So it kind of was something that kept coming back, basically. And I'm going to hand over to Emma now, after that very brief kind of context setting, who's going to tell you a little bit more then about what we've done and how we've tried to work together to mitigate that risk as time's gone on.
Thank you, Ros. And yes, I'm Emma. I'm the centre coordinator, obviously working very closely with Ros, who's our centre manager. And if we could just move on to the next slide, please. So as Ros has explained, the risk that we're using in this case study today is people's well-being in relation to the emotionally demanding research topics, with of course the risk being the negative impact on people's well-being. And to mitigate this risk, a number of risk responses have been put in place. I'm going to briefly explain what these are before moving on. I think the context is helpful before I move on to talk about our risk management approach. As you can see, guidance and training have been a big part of our wellbeing risk mitigation strategy. In terms of the guidance, we've produced a centre fieldwork safety guidance document, which takes into consideration both physical and the emotional/mental wellbeing, using solutions specific to our research, such as, for example, wellbeing risks associated with police ride-alongs. We've also produced a wellbeing guidance document, and that includes signposting to various things, centre support, professional support, and also self-care support. This does include signposting to institutional support and mentoring, but we identified gaps in our institutional provision and for the wellbeing risk is specifically associated with our research and the nature of our research. So we wanted to take this provision further. So as part of our offer and in line with best practice, we have as a centre sourced and committed funding to independent clinical supervision, which is for all centre staff. So this includes our centre PhDs as well as professional services staff that can access if they would like to. We've also invested in specific training, different types of training. We've invested in researcher wellbeing training, and we had 2 separate sessions for this, one for research staff and a separate session for management and professional services staff. And this was provided by Tina Skinner at the University of Bath. And Tina's part of the Researcher Wellbeing Project. We've got a link there on the bottom of the slides and with further information on that when these get shared out. But essentially, this is a project that explores the impacts of researching emotionally challenging topics and aims to establish what interventions researchers would want for their wellbeing. And as a result of having the training ourselves, we've implemented optional offers to our staff, one of which included wellbeing plans. And I say optional because we respect that everybody has the right to manage their wellbeing in the way that best works for them. But just as a brief overview of what the wellbeing plans can contain, it asks the researchers to consider questions such as, and not just researchers, this is for all staff, including myself as a PSS member of staff, professional services. It's what resources might help you, what activities might help you, what services might help you. Gets people to think about their daily routine, their life context, what's going on outside of the work, personal connections to the research topics, which of course is very relevant, and warning signs, getting people to think ahead of time, what are their potential warning signs. And these plans are produced by the individual, and should they be comfortable, is in conjunction with their line manager and sharing them with their line manager. But as Ros has mentioned earlier, as well as looking after ourselves and our colleagues, people's wellbeing to us means anybody that could be potentially impacted by the centre's work. So most recently, very recently, within the last few weeks or months, we have procured some trauma informer training for researchers, which had a focus on research participants' wellbeing. This type of training we found was incredibly difficult to source. But the reason why it's been so recent is we pursued looking for kind of the right training for us. And the feedback we've received from this training has been incredibly positive. So it was worth that perseverance. So have you heard, very quickly, we have implemented a range of risk responses, but I'm going to move on to talk about how we arrived at these responses. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So the first thing to say, this was very much a collaborative approach involving a huge range of centre stakeholders, researchers themselves, our centre leadership team, professional services staff, the ethical oversight panel, which Ros has mentioned, our institutional colleagues, and external providers. And as Ros has also mentioned, one of our centre co-investigators is our early career researcher champion, and they have been heavily involved in this work, including drafting the wellbeing guidance and assisting with finding appropriate training providers and helping with me with that. I'm not a researcher, I don't know what's best for researchers. So that collaborative approach has worked really, really well for us. And discussions about how to manage wellbeing risk have been held at a variety of our meetings. So our leadership team meetings, centre team meetings, the ethical oversight panel meets a couple of times a year as well, individual meetings with line managers, with their line managee, and no single individual was left out of contributing to the discussion if they wanted to. And also, just as importantly, no individual was left holding this risk alone, because we know for some of our line managers, they were concerned about their colleagues' wellbeing. So it was very much a shared risk with a collaborative approach, and fostering an open and honest culture whilst accepting that not everybody is comfortable with being open about their wellbeing, and opting more of an opt-in approach has really helped with that as well. I think it's also really important to note that funding and senior commitment to support the mitigation measures has been key. We have put aside up to £10,000 for clinical supervision, for example, but we have had to pick and choose as to where we place our resources. Best practice models, including those that I mentioned with Tina Skinner at Bath. So those of you who look at the link, you'll find more about best practice options available. But for example, this includes the provision of gym membership but we felt as a centre that this is something that people were more likely to be able to implement themselves compared to, say, clinical supervision. So therefore, we've not offered to fund gym memberships, for example, but we have offered to make clinical supervision available. So it's very much, doing what works for each individual team. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So finally, I'd just like to stress that managing people's wellbeing risk is an ongoing and evolving process. For example, we're currently on version F of our centre wellbeing guidance document, so that just demonstrates that we are reviewing and revisiting our approach as our knowledges and circumstances change. And that's in the we're just coming up to 4 years life of the centre, so that's 6 versions of the wellbeing guidance. So it is very much iterative and ongoing. We also acknowledge we don't always get it right. We're certainly not portraying ourselves as the best in this, but we are sharing our experiences to help encourage yourselves and others to consider some of the issues we've spoken about today. And just as an example of something we tried and had to change because it wasn't effective, was we did have staff safety and wellbeing as a standing item at our monthly centre team meetings, but we found that people just weren't forthcoming with raising issues in that forum. But what we did find is that an alternative approach that's worked really well and is still ongoing is our researchers have researcher-only fortnightly drop-in meetings. They hold it online, and it's for ad hoc peer support. And that's something that we have kept going. So it is very much, a test and try iterative approach. We're not prescriptive, and we certainly embrace the fact that different approaches worked for different people. I think, there's so much we could have spoken about today on this. There's been a lot of interest in our work. You can see on the slide, there's a list of people and organisations who have been interested in hearing more. Ross mentioned earlier as well that we are working to share some resources publicly, probably over the coming year, and we're happy to share that with the Value and Voices community, and of course, once they're available in due course. But I think to make sure we do have time for questions, I'll wrap it up there. But thanks for listening, and I hope that's been helpful for you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Roz and Emma. It's so insightful, and it's great to hear just the experience of trying things out and what works for you. And I think, when we've been thinking about this principle, some of the key things that you've spoken about have come through, because I think it was really for us, it was about the collaboration. You don't deal with a risk on your own. You can't, and you shouldn't have to. And the forums that you've set up, Carisha, and just the whole approach that your research centre has taken just really shows that. And as you said as well, Emma, there are gaps in institutional support, and so you have to make your own contextual affordances there. But just on the slide that's on the screen now, which I'll whip through because we'll be sharing them and all the links are there, there is some institutional support for this. It's expected that a line manager will cultivate a team culture in which everyone is able to share risks and responsibility is taken by your manager, and there's support for that provided by the institution as well. So that's an expectation. And just to highlight the staff resources, there's plenty on there about well-being, as Cara mentioned, the kind of online presence of researchers and you putting yourself out there is a kind of a current risk. There's things on there about that, health and safety, and those broader risks, creating data plans, how you're going to manage your data. If you get entangled in legal issues, the university has support systems for these things. And we offer team training. Again, it's building that team culture where you're aware of risks and you're cultivating a future culture of researchers who are more kind of risk aware. And there's some other training put on by the university around social media. So all those links are there for you to look at afterwards. But we're going to just move on in the final sort of 10 minutes of the session to have a look at how the Valuing Voices tool itself can help you with risk management. So this is our tool, and a quick tour. You can go into risk mapping on our tool, and there's information about what it is, really lots of what we've shared with you today, a kind of definition and overview. But really key, there's some broader resources, and actually you've mentioned the University of Bath project. There's some information on the tool about that as well, actually, because that is really fantastic. But you can see we've got lots of different frameworks for mapping risks, so you can try out different ways. You know, you don't have to use the kind of log system that we have used. There are other things out there, matrices, and lots on psychological safety, as much as we could get, and we would love to add the centre's resources to this. Carisha, your resources are up here as well. So there's lots to tap into. And hopefully the aim with the tool is that once you've familiarised yourself a little bit with risk and thought about how it applies to your project and how you might map and manage those risks, there's 4 planning questions that you can answer to help you think about how you will implement strategic risk mapping in your project. And as for all of the principles, it's centered around 4 results-based planning questions. So results-based planning means you start with the end in mind. You start with where you want to get to. And so these questions take you through thinking what successful strategic risk mapping in your research would look like, and prompting you to come up with that vision, and then drilling down into how you'll deliver your outcome, how you'll map those risks, and then what actions you'll need to do that, how you'll monitor those risks going forward. And as we talked about in what we've heard today already, the kind of resources you need to manage risk, and you do need to set money aside for this. You do need to have identified what those risks are in order to understand how to resource them. So that the tool takes you through ways to think about how you'd implement this in a project. And I'll hand over to Karen now to talk about that in a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Lucy. Can you please show the slide?
Can you see that?
Not yet.
Okay, bear with me 1 second. Try and share again. There we go. There we go. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so Lucy just showed what the tool looks like online, and we've just taken out sort of like how do you answer those questions that guide you through the principles in the tool. So 5 principles for each one. We have the same 4 questions that, as Lucy said, take you from the big picture to the really practical implications for your project. And we often get the question, well, can you give us an example? Especially the first 2 questions are generally pretty hard to answer for researchers. It seems like people are always in action mode, and so thinking about the bigger picture is sometimes hard. So what I always say is that what does successful strategic risk mapping look like in a project, or the same question around any of the other principles is, I mean, you can start by daydreaming. How would it look perfectly? And then the questions will get you back to reality anyway. But in the context of strategic risk mapping, I would say the success in risk mapping is that you've already done some risk mapping. I mean, it is that ongoing present. And if you're looking to use this tool for an application, you will be building in your project proposal on risk mapping you've already done ahead of your proposal. So, and you will have identified risks in all different areas, and I would expect that those are sort of woven in throughout your research project proposal. So we would you would start with you've already minimized the risk you could already think of in your pre-application phase. You will continue with that to make sure that your mitigation plans remain effective. You will have something in place to timely identify emerging risks, and find ways to mitigate, and ultimately your strategic risk mapping will help deliver your project efficiently, effectively, on time, and within budget, so your project will be a success and not being disturbed by any of the risks you can control. So that's sort of the bigger picture of what you want to do. And I think with a principle like strategic risk mapping, it's a very specific process. So it doesn't necessarily have to be all bells and whistles. It's showing funders that you have thought this through. So when we look at how will you deliver your outcome, you could think about monitoring the execution of the current mitigation plans, general awareness among team members of risk. So again, as we've discussed a few times already, making sure it's just not on the shoulders of one person, that these risks are shared, and that we are all aware of the risks, and what could be done, but also assignment of specific risks to specific people in terms of monitoring those risks. So making sure things just don't hang in the air and nobody picks it up at all. So those are usually in the Valuing Voices approach, sort of like the harder bits. It's sort of like, what does it look like? Where do we want to go before we define our actions? So, I mean, actions can be really simple. So I've put down, for example, we need to make sure everybody has access to the strategic map we already have. We need the instructions on how to use the document. We have, for example, we advocate in Valuing Voices that we have a project handbook. Something like this could be part of a project handbook. You may need to have some baseline on what people know about the risks that are relevant to your project. So, for example, about compliance, does everybody have sort of a basic level of knowledge of what they need to know, for example, in terms of GDPR, for example. So what can you do there? How are you going to make sure that it stays the focus of in your project? So what agenda, where is it going to be a standing item on the agenda? So those are really, and we've mentioned these throughout the hour, really sort of the practical ways of getting a grip on strategic risk mapping. And then the last one is, and that's going to be a huge puzzle, of course, it's not as simple as it is here, because of course there's a lot more to consider. But you may need to plan for some people to deliver training. You may need to make time to have everybody trained. You need to have time for writing the instructions and so on and so forth. So really getting to the nitty-gritty of what it is that needs to happen for ultimately your approach to work. And I'll leave it at that because it's 2:00 now, so I'm really sorry we're running a bit late. So if you need to leave, please do, and if you want to hang around and ask some questions, then we're opening the floor to you now. So if you have any questions for me and Lucy, or for Carisha, Ross, or Emma, please let us know, either in the chat or just speak up.
So it looks like lots of people have to head off, but we will absolutely share all our contact details and of the speakers as well, if that's okay with you both. And then if anyone has any follow-up questions, we'll make sure that they get to the right place. But thank you very, very much for your time, and hopefully things have been useful in this session and that you're going away with lots of ideas. We'll be in touch with you, and do check out the tool Yeah, and have a good afternoon. Thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.